Hello and welcome. I'm Beth Cougler Blom, and this is Facilitating on Purpose. In this episode, I'm talking with Claire Schneeberger about how we can bring meditation and mindfulness practices into our workshops, our meetings, our learning experiences in simple ways. Claire is the author of Holding Space, a book that I loved after reading it, after Claire sent me a copy, knowing that we were going to have this episode together. Claire leads workshops and classes and circles related to mindfulness and compassion and well-being. But the neat thing is she also brings decades of experience in online learning and instructional design. So she gets both the facilitator and the learning designer perspective. As you can imagine, we were two peas in a pod, as I also am a facilitator and a learning designer. So it was great to have this conversation with Claire for that reason, but also because I've been starting to experiment with mindfulness meditation practices as well in my own facilitation work and in my personal life. And it was great to just bring my sort of newbie perspective to this conversation and have Claire reassure me, and I hope all of us, that we don't have to be experts to be able to lead these types of practices in our work. So I hope this episode gives you some encouragement and some practical ideas, both for how you bring mindfulness into the spaces where you facilitate. Enjoy the show. Claire, it's so wonderful to see you. Thanks for joining me for this conversation today.
My pleasure, Beth.
I love that you were one of the people that reached out to me to let me know that you were out there in the world. Sometimes I get that as the host of a podcast, but it just landed for me so well when you reached out to tell me about your new book, Holding Space, The Essential Guide to Leading Meditation and Mindfulness Practices. I thought, I want that for myself and hopefully for others as well. So thanks again for being here and reaching out.
That's wonderful. It's great to find you. There's a real range of people for whom this book could be useful. Facilitators and group settings is one of the audiences that I had in mind when I started, just imagining writing this book.
Absolutely. I mean, leading mindfulness and meditation practices, I'll say right off the bat that I'm very new to it. I want to learn more. And I hope that a lot of people out there may be saying the same thing to themselves right now, or maybe they will be more after they hear this conversation and maybe learn a little bit more about how doable I think it is, especially the way you've presented it in your book.
Yes, a lot of people think, oh, I've got to be an expert meditator to do this. But the reality is just to add 5 minutes of time for people to center, to take a breath is super useful in so many settings. And you don't need to be an expert to just kind of set up the conditions to allow people space to settle, to calm down, to slow down. And those are all super useful in in many, many different situations.
I think in all situations, especially in the world we're living in today, that so often people are coming to our meetings or our workshops sort of frenzied, I think, for what's going on in the world, or they're carrying a lot. I think everyone's carrying a lot, including facilitators, right? Participants and facilitators. And to just start with some of these like quick to longer practices can be so beneficial.
Yeah, well, and I sort of designed the book to be a little bit of a choose your own adventure kind of approach so that people could find what worked for them, what fits their group. There's not just one way to do it. I think that's actually one of the common myths that I come across. Is people think there's like one certain way. And the reality is there's so many different practices, different approaches, and different styles for leading. And so my goal was to give people a real range so that they could find themselves somewhere in the book.
Absolutely. That's really accessible to everyone. Because as you say, someone might say, oh, well, I've never meditated myself, or I'm not an expert meditator, or what is mindfulness? I mean, there's a whole range of what folks may or may not have done. And it's kind of scary, isn't it, to think about leading these kinds of things, but it doesn't have to be, I don't think. That's what I'm getting from your book anyway.
Yeah, the idea is just to make it really practical. And if you're somebody that has experience meditating, it might give you there's 27 different practices in the book. So it might give you some new ideas or different things to try. And if you've never done it before, it gives you sort of an entry point and some ideas about kind of the foundations. What are the most common questions? Sometimes people are afraid of, oh, what if they ask me, fill in the blank, and I won't know the answer because I'm not an expert. So it covers some of those sort of foundational common questions so that people can feel like they have all the foundational information to be able to communicate and take people through an experience.
It is very well written, Claire. I mean, you are a former learning designer or instructional designer yourself, and I can tell. I mean, as a learning designer, I always look at people's books, like learning designers who have written books, and I go, "Oh yeah, they know what they're doing because of the way it's just so easy to read, it's laid out well." And I don't know, maybe just take us back a little bit in terms of your journey from that type of work to writing this book? What's the short story of how you got here?
Well, I think the short story is that I'm really fascinated by how our minds work. And from a learning designer point of view, you're constantly trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and imagine, where they are, what experience, what information, what context they need in order to be able to take in new information, put it to use. You're really thinking about your learner and understanding how people's brains work is a big part of what can make you a more successful learning designer. Meditation is the same territory in a lot of ways, which is what is going on in the mind. When you sit down and you start to meditate, most people's experience is a realization that, oh my gosh, my mind is crazy. It's jumping around and you get this insight into the way that the mind can work. So I think there's that through line between meditation and learning design. And I just find it fascinating how our brains work, move, think, and how we can work with that to learn new things, to create a state of mind that's more creative or calm, and to feel some agency. Sometimes it feels like our mind is just running around and we're feeling crazy, and that we don't have to be kind of victims of the wiring in our head.
Yeah, kind of work with it or because we'll never get rid of that. Do they call it like monkey mind or something? Am I making that up? Is that what they call it? Monkey mind?
Yes,
Yeah.
the mind that's constantly running around and thinking, and that's what our minds do. It's natural. We don't ever tell our heart, "Stop beating. I don't want, you to beat." It's part of the what the heart is meant to do, and I think it's the same with the mind. It's an organ that thinks, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's nice to have some ability to slow down the thoughts or change the state of mind.
I think you must have benefited yourself over many years, probably from mindfulness and meditation practices to be able to say, okay, how can I give some of this to others? Can you say a little bit about like your own journey in learning?
So I started my own company in learning design, and that was quite a journey 'cause I didn't go to business school. I actually went to music school. And so sort of jumped in as an entrepreneur, and as any other small business owner knows that it's can be very stressful and demanding. And I was working, long hours and feeling really a high amount of stress, I think. And of course, I knew and had heard meditation is helpful for dealing with stress. And that's when I said, I really need this, sort of out of desperation that I need something to help me deal with all of the stress. And that's what drove me to get more into meditation. And then once you start doing it, you think, oh, this is helpful. Maybe it'll be helpful for somebody else. So I started teaching beginning meditation. And for about 7 years now, I lead a group of women at my local center for women with cancer. It's a mindful meditation group for women with cancer.
Must have learned so much through that facilitation experience, maybe some missteps along the way as well. Did you start out perfectly, Claire, and just do it
No,
really
no.
well?
Well, I'm sure as you experienced as a facilitator, that one of the fascinating aspects is that you learn from the people that you're working with.
Absolutely.
So you get to be in this privileged position of being surrounded by people who are opening up, sharing their experiences, and you really get insight into the variety of how people are experiencing things. And so it really is a great learning experience to hear, what works for somebody might not work for somebody else, or discover that the instructions you've given really threw somebody, off track. And so having the opportunity to facilitate in a way that gives you feedback is super, super helpful.
And I want to pick up the book now because that's reminding me there's a spot I wanted to mention, and maybe it's jumping off. I was thinking about you, probably were thinking about all of the sessions you've led as you were writing the book. But there's this piece around how it lands with people, like as you're saying, like people are different. I mean, they teach us stuff. So you said recently I had someone respond, I didn't like that at all. It felt bad and I didn't want to do it. So I did something else instead. And you talked about kind of your first instinct to be defensive, or was to be defensive around that kind of comment. Like, what are you trying to do here? I don't like this. I don't want to do this. But then you kind of came to a new realization, I think, about people. Do you want to say more about that?
I think it's one of the things that really freed me up as a facilitator is that I don't have to make things right. In air right. What is right for any one person is really something that they're going to find on their own. And so it's very freeing to feel like, oh, I don't need to fix this for them. I just need to help them discover what works for them. That definitely can free you up as a facilitator to feel like it's not your job to be perfect because, of course, no one can be.
No, I sometimes say we can't be all things to all people. I mean, we're just a human trying to do facilitation work, aren't we? We can't know what everyone needs all the time. So when someone says to you, when you're leading a mindfulness or meditation practice, or maybe just after, I didn't like that. I didn't even do it. Then, like, what do you say to them? What do you say to yourself?
I usually start by saying, how interesting. I wonder why. What are the thoughts that were going through your head? What feels better? It's one of the reasons why I've got 27 different practices in the book because not everything's going to work for everybody. And for beginning meditators, I often keep practices very short. You can do something very effective in as little as 3 minutes, or you can spend 30 minutes in, a guided kind of session. I think there's a big range. And so with beginners, I try to keep things short and I try to offer different things. So a couple or two or three short things if you're doing something over time, or if the purpose of coming together is to try different practices. Because that way, when somebody says, "Oh, that didn't work for me," you're like, "Oh, okay, let's try this one and see how that works." And people can kind of learn their own style by doing it. It's very experiential.
Yeah, and they maybe you've introduced it to them for the first time and they're going, what is this? Or and somebody's going, I love this. This is amazing. I want more of this. And so yeah, I love that you're offering a few different practices maybe so they can kind of get a range and go, oh yeah, which one do I like the most? Which one's resonating? Which one I'm not ready for yet or never will be or whatever. Yeah. So you're offering up choice and a range of experiences, it sounds like.
Yes. The other thing I've discovered since the book came out, I thought quite a lot in the book about different kinds of practices and what they're good for. And, if you're a beginner or more experienced and all these different things, but I didn't think so much about the people leading the meditations. And I've got feedback from friends. I had one friend who said, I would never lead a meditation practice in a group setting. And she facilitates all kinds of workshops and educational sessions for health educators, which is a perfect audience, right? But
Yes.
she's like, it's just not me. I'm not a meditator. I'm not one of those touchy feely kind of people. I think there are certain practices in the book that are really good for people who don't think, "Oh, I don't have the right voice," or there's different ways and different practices that are just so simple that you really, really can almost have no meditation experience and be successful creating a moment for people to take a breath and slow down. And it can be very directed without needing to be, have a certain expertise.
Yeah, I can attest to that because I told you before we started recording, I facilitated the very first one, 1.1.
How did it go?
Mindfulness of breathing. So the first one in the breathing section. And I felt I was successful. I mean, there's a section, like there's an introduction here. I think you probably have the same pattern in each of the practices, don't you? There's an introduction, how to practice, there's a variation and tips. So I literally just sat and read the how to practice pretty much to the group. But I did tell them that I don't usually do this and that I was doing it for the first time. Like, depending on, because I'm teaching facilitation. So I like to say to groups, well, I don't always, but sometimes I'll say, I've never done this before either, so that they know that it's something that I'm still working on, or it's okay to try things in front of the group. It felt successful. I will say it was a hospice organization. And what was running through my mind was, oh, a lot of the people in the room probably have done something like this before. And that was a little bit of like imposter syndrome showing up, right? Going, am I doing it right? Would they do it better than I? Like I've been facilitating for more than 20 years and I still have those kinds of feelings going, am I doing it good enough? So, but I loved it and I want to do more of it for sure. Anything coming up for you about my first experience?
It's wonderful. And I think it's great that you're modeling that it's okay to try something new. And the thing that I've found when you're in a mixed group of people who may have, some meditation experience or extensive meditation or mindfulness experience, along with people who are total novices and is like not part of their experience at all, I've found that the experienced people know their way and they're always just fine. They understand what it's like to be new and that they appreciate, and kind of your job when you're leading is to make sure everybody can come along. And the experienced people kind of just fall in. They can drop in from their own experience and they don't need you as much perhaps. But there's benefit even to pull back and kind of start at the beginning again. And so the thing that I've found, I guess, is just that the experienced people are not judging you. They're you typically comfortable and appreciating, rethinking that beginner's mind kind of place.
Yeah, I like that. And I like that you said they're not judging you because I often say that about the participants out there that they wish us well. They're not judging us. It's actually very uncomfortable for them to watch us sort of quote unquote screw up. So they don't want to see that, do they? So, so yeah, that's a really helpful reminder. I'm in Canada, you're in the States. I don't know if you do the same down where you are, but here it's very common to facilitate a traditional land acknowledgement, to acknowledge the land that we're on. And I did this mindfulness practice right after the land acknowledgement, in which I brought in the First Peoples principles of learning, we call them here, Indigenous knowledge about pedagogy, basically, right? Because that was the topic of our workshop. And the two practices paired with each other just felt so calming, and we were at a nature sanctuary, so that was even better, right? To have the setting just mirror everything that we were trying to do to start the session. So I think it works, and we need more of this.
Yes, and so frequently I've seen, so many different settings where this can be useful in kind of a board retreat or a workplace strategy session, or I've seen it done with people who are students in emergency rooms, medical students. So it's so wide ranging. So, so often in meetings where people are coming together, like a retreat or a strategy session or a planning session, there'll be like, I know it's kind of a charged topic, but like the icebreaker, you connect or we put people in small groups and talk with each other. And sometimes it's really helpful to first slow down and just connect with yourself before you get thrown into this kind of interactive workshop environment. And it can really help people get more focused and be more present for whatever's going to be happening.
Yeah, and just arrive to the place, even if it's a virtual session, hey, that there's always folks coming in a little bit late or a little bit frenzied, as I think I've already said, or I don't know. I mean, there could be lots of really hard things that people have experienced right before the time we have with them too. So yeah, just to land well individually together, I guess as well.
Yes.
Now in the book you have groupings of the different types of practices. So and starting with breath based, which is the one I started with. Can you go through just those? Are there five groupings? Or is there an order that you might suggest people, if you have kind of less time or more time, do we do one or the other first, or does it kind of not matter? Like, tell me a little bit about the types of practices.
Yeah. Well, I group them into 5 groups, as you said, starting with practices that are focused on breathing or different kinds of breath practices. You can focus on your body, the physical body. And both of those things are great because they're happening in the present moment. Our goal is to let go of all the thoughts and just be present here and now. And your breathing is here and now, and your physical body is here and now. So just connecting with breath, with sensations is really foundational in meditation. And then the third type of practice is focused awareness practice, where you focus on one thing. Probably the most sort of stereotypical meditation practice that people think of when you say meditation is mantra, like repeating a mantra over and over again. So that's an example where you pick one thing and you really focus. But there's kind of the total other end of the spectrum practices, which are open awareness practices. And that is more mindfulness, where you might just sit and notice the sounds that are happening around you, just being open to whatever's happening. And then the final type of practice is compassion focused practice. And I spent a year in an applied compassion training that was offered through Stanford University on compassion. And that's a whole world of practices and is very foundational and ancient practice in meditation as well. So that gives you kind of a flavor of the range. And I don't know that there's necessarily one place to start. I do include in the book some recommendations of if you're working with people who have no experience, here are some places that are easy and good places to start. Also, sometimes you're working with a group that knows each other well and is comfortable sharing. And sometimes you're working with a group of people that don't really know each other well. And so there are some, meditation is can be take people to a place that's very vulnerable. And that could be, great in a setting where you know each other and there's a lot of trust. But in a place where you're with people you don't know well, you might not want to start there. So I've tried to give people some pointers around how to adapt or which practices might fit based on different situations.
Yeah, that's good. And I know from our learning design knowledge, I mean, we know we're trying to consider what our goals and our purpose are and who our learners are and all that. So it plays into it, doesn't it? What are you trying to do and for who?
Yes, there's definitely also suggestions around kind of your outcome goals because it could be that you're wanting to get people focused. They've been off on a lunch break and they're all scattered and you're trying to get people in the afternoon to come back and really focus in. Or you might be in a strategy session and want people to really kind of loosen up, open up, become, more creative and move into a creative space. Meditation has so many possible outcomes, and the type of meditation you do can really support your goals. So, I do give some hints in the book around which practices might be best suited to those different kinds of goals.
Yeah, and it helps the newer folks among us give us something to kind of hold on to in our design time and you help us out, I think, a little bit as to what we could put where. Yeah, I could see. I mean, I haven't done the open awareness ones, but could we use something like that if we're trying to encourage the group to think outside themselves in a way? Like if, so there's sort of, you could be drawing them inward, maybe sometimes you're drawing them outward.
Yes, absolutely. There's even a practice in that section on open awareness of mindful listening that you do with a partner. And that's a super powerful exercise of just listening to somebody else. You pick a topic. And also really helpful for people who think, oh, I'm not a meditator. And it's really just a practice of being present and mindful and listening, which is often something you are trying to do as a facilitator with a group, is to get people to open up, to consider other points of view. And that's a great practice that you can do in about 10 minutes that gets people engaged and involved, but also moving them to a space that's more mindful and open.
I'm glad you said that because it could be a myth, I guess, around facilitating these practices that we would think that they were all internally focused, that they were just about us sitting alone with ourselves and our thoughts. And yeah, but it's could be working with someone else as well. Maybe that's even easier for someone to, because that's more like an activity that we would run regularly.
Yes, absolutely. I think some of the other ones that are really accessible are there's a couple practices in there that involve movement. There's one called cloud hands where you're moving your hands along with the breath as you're breathing the hands. And so people do that with their eyes open and you can do that as a group together. So it can really build focus and awareness and synchronicity within the group. But for some people, even just closing their eyes in a room full of other people can be really disconcerting. Like, is somebody looking at me? And what's happening in this room, where just feeling safe in a unusual environment is really important. So there are several practices that you can do with your eyes open. So those I think are really useful in a kind of setting where it might be unfamiliar and you're wanting to help people feel grounded and safe.
Yeah. And haven't we all been that person to kind of look around and go, "Is everyone else closing their eyes? Because I don't really wanna close mine first," or whatever. But you do talk about giving people options, and I think from an inclusion perspective that isn't the breath and also eyes open, eyes closed, like, aren't those the 2 kind of big things, and maybe there's more than that around where we really do have to invite options within, like, there's no have to have about either of those or more?
Absolutely. On sort of a universal level, it's just wanting everybody to be comfortable. So that could mean how you're positioning, like you might want to stand up and do something standing up or sit if sitting you want to be comfortable, so encouraging people to feel like they can move around. That's actually one of the other myths. People have this vision of meditating, like a pretzel with your legs wrapped in a knot and your eyes are closed and you're perfectly still, and they think, "Oh, that's so uncomfortable." And so just encouraging people that there's no right one way, and adjusting their body, making sure they're comfortable is important. There's also, real situations where people have had past trauma, and going in to the experience of the physical body or the breath can be hard for some people or even uncomfortable. And so giving those guidelines that you should feel free to take care of yourself, do what feels right for you, giving people options so if they feel stuck, they have somewhere to go. And so those are the kinds of things that in the book I think are helpful for somebody who's new to facilitating, of just kind of that listing of what are useful foundational things to introduce for your group so that you can feel confident everybody's going to get through this okay.
Mhm, and that they can choose for themselves. Like, after I facilitated the one I did, which was about breath, I think I had given options around eyes and eyes closed or soft gaze, but then later I was talking to the person who engaged me to be there, and I said, "Oh, I forgot to do the kind of a more broad invitation around the breath," because it was a breath-based practice. So, maybe next time I would say something more expansive or inclusive, I think, about this will be a breath-based practice, but if you would choose not to do that, you could do X. I don't know. What would you say in that case? Like if I've planned to do a breath-based practice, but you know that somebody out there does not want to do that and they should do something else for themselves. Like, is there a phrase that you would have said?
Having the concept of an anchor is super helpful. And an anchor can be anything that feels comfortable to that person. So for some people, their breath is the anchor, just coming back to the breath, inhaling, exhaling. But also, an anchor could be just feeling your feet on the ground. So if you're doing a breath practice, and for some people, for different reasons, feeling the breath can just feel frustrating or might feel stuck. You can go to something like just feeling the sensation of my feet on the ground.
Mhm. Okay, thank you for that. Yeah. Or maybe the air on your skin or
Hmm.
something. Yeah, something physical, another physical thing.
Yeah. So bringing in that idea of an anchor gives people like, oh, okay, you know, if you're not into where this is going, you can always just go back to your anchor. Or the anchor is also useful if the other thing that happens is that people start thinking about other things. You give them 5 seconds of silence and they're thinking about, "Oh, what's gonna be dinner tonight, and what do I need to pick up at the store on my way home?" And an anchor can be useful when people get wander off into thinking and come back to your anchor. And
Mhm.
they realize, "Oh, yeah, I'm supposed to be doing this," and they've got a place to come back to. So that's a really useful concept.
I think it's also kinda humorous too, right? Because I have, Apple Fitness, and so I've listened to some of the meditations within that, and they'll do that kind of like, "And if you've started to think of other things, just come on back, but don't judge yourself," I think is what they do say as well, that it doesn't serve us to judge ourselves about how we're meditating.
No, and that's super foundational to all mindfulness is that quality of being non-judgmental. And I would say it's not just being non-judgmental, it's being outright friendly towards yourself, and that's where compassion comes in too. Of just really accepting what's happening. It can be really comical when you start to actually notice where your mind is jumping to, and I'll suddenly be thinking about something from 20 years ago. And I'm like, where did that thought come from? And it can be almost comical how the mind jumps around.
I have that with my husband, just in normal conversation where, you're talking about A, and then all of a sudden someone's talking about S or whatever, and you go, "How did you," and then we go, "Oh, let me share with you the mental leaps I took to get from A to S," That was kind of where our brain just goes so fast. Yeah, it's so common.
Absolutely.
Now, I talked about learning things or showing the group that I was learning a something, a meditation practice in front of them, but I think there are other ways that you would recommend that facilitators practice. We don't always have to do it in front of the group, do we? So how do you, if people are really new to this, or even if they just want to stretch themselves into some of these other areas of the practices, how can we practice away from the group and feel more comfortable?
I absolutely started, and I encourage everybody getting started to, as painful as it can be, to pull out your phone and record just a voice memo and just try 5 minutes and listen back to yourself because you can learn a lot about kind of your tempo and the pacing just by hearing yourself back. Spending a little time embodying and really experiencing that for yourself will help you arrive at a way of delivering that is helpful for others. But, I think it's okay to just try. And by recording yourself though and listening back, you can learn a lot that will help you adjust how you're delivering.
And maybe hear that you were pretty good at it too, or the tone of your voice was lovely and calming, or because I used to teach a workshop where people had to video themselves facilitating, and we always tried to find the good things too, but it's both, isn't it? I mean, obviously, there are things like pacing is hard because you think, "Well, is this enough time before I say the next thing?" So, kind of being on the receiving end of your own meditation practice would be interesting to kind of notice where the tweaks could happen, but there's lots of positive stuff that maybe we could notice as well.
It's true. We're constantly judging ourselves and you think, "Oh, this must be terrible." And then you listen back, you're like, "Oh, that was okay. That worked." And so yes, you it's good to get that perspective by recording yourself to be able to then go back and go, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, people might not have known that that was my first time, and I'm not saying people always have to say to the group, you don't have to admit, do you, that it's your first time doing anything unless you think it's useful for them.
No, you don't have to. But it's also a learning moment to say it's not about judging. And so when you model that for people, if you slip or something doesn't go quite right, to say, "Oh, I'm still practicing and getting better at this. You're modeling for people that it's okay to try and we don't have to go to judgment.
Are there times where you would suggest we really don't want to integrate these practices at all? Are they useful anytime? Like what do you think about kind of the no-no sort of pieces around it?
I'm really trying to think, when I was in the applied compassion training, it was a super interesting group that came from all walks of life. One of the things that inspired me to write the book was that these were people doing all different kinds of things. I had a classmate who was working with refugees from Ethiopia who had been through genocide and, a war-torn country. I had colleagues who were home caregivers, helping their spouses. Just this huge range. I had, people who were in sales at a car dealership, were all cases where people looking to provide opportunities for their groups to get more centered, to feel calmer or just more comfortable or less stressed. And so I feel like there's pretty much a universal need and ways to approach it. And again, it doesn't have to be a big deal. Just 3 minutes can really shift the energy and the focus of a group.
And not just at the start of a session, probably, right? Where I used it. You've mentioned different parts of the day or coming back after a frenzied break or lunch or I don't know, because we do want to think about that. I'll sometimes call it the arc. Like, what does the energy level look like at certain points? And there are times when we want to ground and times when we want to kind of rile the group up a little bit in a good way. So, yeah, it can be at any point during our sessions, I think, if it's useful to us in the group.
Yes. And even just some of the breathing can energize people.
Oh, that's good to think about.
It's not just about, oh, we need to calm people down, but it can be energizing to take some breaths or different practices around that can wake people up and get the energy flowing.
That's good because it's a myth I probably have in my own mind that meditation and mindfulness practices equal grounding activities, but maybe not, you're saying. Thanks for that. That's a expanding of my knowledge there.
Well, and you can be both grounded and energized at the same time.
Okay, okay. I'm really peeling back the layers here. What did it do for you to write this book? I mean, I think you've already mentioned learning from people who've started to read it and just kind of your awareness and knowledge gets expanded. Where are you going from here? Did you find out pieces where you thought, oh, I didn't really think about it that way, or I didn't write about that in the book? Do you have a second book coming? Are there other things that you want to share with the world to kind of keep going around this?
I think for me, there's a few different aspects. One is helping people who think that, oh, there's no way I'm not a meditator. I just heard an interview. I think it was Kara Swisher. She's like, oh, meditation, totally not for me. There's people that have that kind of reaction. And, just an awareness that being mindful, you don't have to go in a cave for an hour and sit in quiet darkness, that there's a lot of things you can do that can enhance your well-being that don't fit that sort of stereotypical experience. So that's one area that I find interesting and just getting the word out to people who think, oh, there's no way. Because just a little bit can make a big difference for people. The other area is unrelated that I find interesting is how different experiences, whether that's being in nature or hearing a beautiful poem or the way that the arts can help generate that openness or new perspective and change our state of mind. So I've done some work with our local state park on mindfulness experiences in nature and poetry, using poetry for contemplation. So I find that super interesting as well.
That's really exciting. I talked once to my friend Marissa Gelfusa on this podcast about poetry and writing and facilitating those types of experiences. And I'm volunteering with our arts council right now, which for me too, I mean, this is the direction that I think I'm going in. How can we get out in nature more? How can we look at the expressive arts and use them in corporate boardrooms and nonprofit workshops? And I don't know, there are crossing of the boundaries perhaps that are exciting to those of us. I mean, maybe just starting our careers, but maybe you and I are kind of similar. We've been around for a little bit. we we're looking for more expansive things in our practices, I think, and where the new learning and new excitements are too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Claire, thank you so much. This has been a gift. I am so happy that I have your physical book. It's going to be part of my resource library for sure. I look forward to pulling it out and using it in my future facilitation work. And good luck with the book and getting the word out and all of your expansive going into nature and arts practices going forward. Thank you so much for having this conversation.
Thank you, Beth. And thanks for all that you do. It's really an incredible resource, this podcast, as well as your new book around facilitation. I just really enjoy the overlap
Me
between
too.
the work that we both have done.
I look forward to our continued connection.
Thank you. Likewise.
Well, it was so wonderful to have this conversation with Claire. I really did enjoy reading her book, and I will keep it by my side for those times when I'm preparing for my next session where I want to integrate short or long mindfulness or meditation practices. It's a great book that you should also get, and I'll have a link for you in the show notes about how you can find her work. I really appreciate it again that she just reminds us so well that we don't have to be expert meditators to be able to do this work, to be able to integrate it as facilitators. It's so lovely just to be able to do something simple to offer people a few moments to just pause and breathe and arrive to a session. And of course, I also loved when we talked about giving people options, whether that's just keeping their eyes open, choosing a different anchor point, or anything that we can do to invite people to take care of themselves in a way that feels right for them. Thanks so much again, Claire, for coming on the show with me and having this wonderful conversation. It was lovely to get to know you a little bit through this time together. Coming up on the podcast, it's a solo episode with me near the end of June. This will be the last episode that I'll be doing before I take a summer break. So hopefully you'll be still around and listening to the podcast until the end of June. Of course, the summer months will be a great time to catch up on any episodes that you've missed in the past. The solo episode coming up will be number 80, so there'll be lots to choose from over the summer break. And I hope you stick with me and mark your calendar for the last episode of this season. Thank you so much for listening. You can find the show notes for all the episodes on facilitatingonpurpose.ca. As always, if you'd like to share feedback about any episode, please drop me a note. I would love to hear from you. And thank you so much, as always, to Mary Chan, my editor, for her fantastic support on this one and every episode. See you next time.